On the 12th of March 1938, the strangest invasion in history begins. German tanks roll across the border into Austria. They're welcomed by smiling civilians who greet the German Führer, Adolf Hitler, as a hero. This is the moment when the countdown to the Second World War begins. The decisions and actions Hitler takes over the next 18 months will drag the world to war. Without him, there would be no Second World War. No Holocaust, no senseless killing of millions of people. To understand how it happened, we need to understand him. In this series, we're telling the story of these 18 months, from the 12th of March 1938 to the 3rd of September 1939, through the eyes of Hitler himself, revealing how this bully, gambler, and arch manipulator brought the world to the edge of destruction. This time, we've reached the 19th of March 1939. Hitler has invaded Czechoslovakia, a clear act of aggression. While at home, the Nazis have launched vicious attacks on Germany's Jews. The world has finally woken up to the Nazi threat. But Hitler is determined to go even further. War now seems closer than ever. Four days after successfully invading Czechoslovakia, Hitler's back in Berlin. The returning hero, he's greeted by an extravagant victory parade.
Hitler is driven to the new Reich Chancellery down the Unter den Linden through a tunnel of light with searchlights beaming into the sky. There's a fireworks display.
There are lots of crowds of people on the streets because it seems like the Führer's done it again. He's taken the whole of Czech Republic without a shot being fired.
Hitler appears on the balcony to rapturous cheers from the people.
As usual, he gives the Hitler salute. He's well prepared for the task.
He actually spends time every morning doing extender exercises to build up the muscles in his arm so he can do that. And it shows you the lengths to which he's prepared to go to give the right impression.
But beyond these celebrations in Berlin, it's another story. Most German people aren't happy about the occupation of Czechoslovakia.
What we've got now is a bit more of a fear about where this is going to lead. Was it really necessary?
Hitler's actions and his risk-taking has made a world war more possible, and that is something not everyone is happy about.
But any Germans who disagree with Hitler's actions are far too frightened to speak out.
Since 1933, the Nazi regime has really been encroaching, impinging German people's lives in every way possible.
Hitler has established the Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls, which were youth organisations which effectively indoctrinated children into the Nazi regime and promoted them as Germany's future.
Adolf Hitler forces the German army to swear a personal allegiance to himself.
Adolf Hitler!
He makes the judges swear allegiance to him.
Hitler also creates two secret forces, the Gestapo, the secret police, and the SS, a special crack squad, who essentially police every aspect of life in Nazi Germany.
He's also made Germany a very uncomfortable environment to live in for any groups of people he feels are anti the German regime, such as the Jewish population, homosexuals, gypsies, pretty much anybody he considers other.
Essentially what it means is that all aspects of people's lives are under control.
Today, as he stands on the balcony of the new Reich Chancellery, Hitler is undisputed leader of a one-party police state. A dictator who believes he should get whatever he wants, which makes him a danger to Germany and the world. Less than a week later, Hitler meets with his army chiefs at the new Reich Chancellery. He tells them that having taken Austria and Czechoslovakia, he's now got his eyes on his biggest prize yet.
Hitler's initial aims, as far as Poland is concerned, are Danzig and the Polish corridor. And the reason for that is that these are territories that Germany has been forced to give up at the end of the First World War.
He not only wants back the city of Danzig and the Polish corridor, but he wants Poland itself to also become another German satellite state.
It's a large country which he considers fit for repopulating with Germans from this expanding population. It takes Germany to the frontiers of the Soviet Union, the ultimate destination for German settlers.
Hitler decides to use the same strategy that worked so well when he invaded Austria and Czechoslovakia.
Hitler says, right, I want this back. And he thinks that the same tactics, bullying, browbeating, all the rest of it is going to work again.
But the Polish government is wise to what Hitler wants to do, and they reject his advances. Worse still, they tell the British about what's going on.
In London, the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain hears about Hitler's aggressive bullying of Poland. He's had enough, and this time he does something different. He very publicly stands up to him.
Chamberlain says, right, that's it. We will guarantee Poland's sovereignty. If Germany invades Poland, goes into the Danzig corridor, we will go to war. And France says exactly the same thing.
Back in Berlin, Hitler is outraged.
He's so angry that he slams his hand down as hard as he can on a marble-top table in the new Reich's Chancellery and utters the immortal phrase, "I'll brew him a devil's potion."
But he swiftly comes to believe that this is mere words on the part of Chamberlain and that the British can't seriously want to risk their entire empire for Poland.
Hitler just doesn't believe what the British and French are telling him. He thinks he knows better. He's convinced that the Allies won't go to war to stop him taking Poland. And he's prepared to risk everything to see if he's right. It's the 3rd of April, and Hitler is on holiday. He's on board the maiden voyage of a cruise ship called the Robert Lai.
The Robert Lai is part of Strength Through Joy, which is essentially the Nazi leisure organisation. So they're responsible for cheap holidays for Germans, subsidised theatre and cinema trips.
The point of this was to really indoctrinate the population, not just to infiltrate them during the day while they're doing their jobs, but actually to control their leisure time too.
Hitler's enjoying a few days at sea, mingling with starstruck holidaymakers. But of course, Hitler's never really off duty. As the cruise sails on, he's busy plotting his next move.
He gives orders for the military commanders to prepare for Case White, which is his name for the preparations for the attack on Poland.
Hitler's determined to invade Poland, no matter who tries to stop him. But there's something Hitler needs to do first. The 20th of April is a big day for Germany. It's the Führer's 50th birthday.
There's a big march past in Berlin, huge display of military might. He stands there kind of clenched-jawed, this new Caesar.
Some of the foreign diplomats there thought that the same tanks had gone round 6 or 7 times to try and give the impression they had more tanks than they really had.
If they hold a parade like this because he's 50 years old, can you imagine what they'll do when he's 100?
Hitler's using his birthday celebrations to demonstrate Germany's military power to the world.
It's a lot of saber rattling. And for most people in Europe who can remember the First World War all too clearly, this is really an escalation. This is really intimidating. This is very, very disturbing indeed to witness.
The birthday celebrations continue because he's given a number of really quite significant birthday presents that include letters from one of his great heroes, Frederick the Great.
And the model of the Victory Arch, which is the demonstration of the new Berlin, the new Germany that will rise from the ashes.
Hitler's determined his 50th year is going to be a memorable one. A week later, Hitler's at the Kroll Opera House in Berlin, giving a speech to the German parliament. He steps up the aggression.
He makes 2 big war-thumping announcements. First, that the non-aggression treaty with Poland is null and void.
The other thing he does is to tear up the Anglo-German naval agreement, which until now has stopped an arms race between the 2 nations.
The significance of this is showing that he is absolutely going to force Poland down, if necessary, by force of arms, but also that he is not scared of confronting the British.
So far, Hitler has acted cautiously in public. He's been careful not to provoke Britain and France. But now, he's becoming impatient. And that's to do with something personal. For years, he's believed that he doesn't have long to live. Hitler's fear of dying young began when he was just 18 years old.
Hitler's mother, Clara, becomes ill with breast cancer in 1907, and Hitler returns from Vienna to nurse her, and he shows great compassion towards her.
She has an operation and she seems to be recovering, and then it gets worse again. And at that time, Hitler is nursing her pretty much every day. He's completely devoted to his mother.
It could well be said that Clara Hitler is the only person that Adolf Hitler ever truly loved.
Clara finally succumbs to her illness, aged just 47. Adolf is inconsolable. But his mother's death causes him more than just heartbreak. It buries itself deep inside him.
This played into Hitler's psyche somehow, and he sort of went forward in life with this idea that he too perhaps would die young.
It makes a hypochondriac of himself. He worries at every small health complaint. He has small stomach cramps. He gets very tensed and stressed and nervous about his own health.
Hitler's fear of dying young will drive him on to achieve his goals as quickly as possible. 2 weeks after his birthday celebrations, Hitler heads to the Berghof, his picturesque retreat in Berchtesgaden in the Bavarian mountains, to mull over his next move.
He's calculating, he's trying to work out. It's such a momentous decision to go into Poland. The stakes have never been higher. And has he got his ducks in a row? Is he making the right decision? What happens if Britain and France do declare war? Are they strong enough to take them on? And I think he just feels that at the Berghof, that is the place where he can think the clearest.
But to onlookers, it seems as though Hitler is on holiday, far from the beating heart of government.
He spends more time at the Berghof than he does in Berlin. This is very unusual. This is like the British Prime Minister, you know, living in the Lake District.
Hitler's weighing up a momentous political decision, but he's joined not by his cabinet ministers, but by his long-term partner, Eva Braun.
Eva Braun is this naive, innocent figure. She's young, blonde, Aryan-looking, beautiful. She's a photographer's assistant, which is how Hitler first comes into contact with her.
Hitler's relationship with Eva Braun is very curious. They don't seem to have a lot in common. She's not interested in politics. She's not a member of the Nazi Party.
She's interested more in gymnastics and photography. She's interested in films and those kinds of things.
Despite their lengthy relationship, Eva Braun always travels separately, stays in different hotels, and is kept away from official functions. Hitler is careful to keep their relationship secret from the German people.
You know, he wants this idea that he is wedded to the German people, which is why he doesn't have children, which is why he's never married. This is his job. This is his parenting. He is the father of Nazi Germany.
Two days after his arrival at the Berghof, Hitler's joined by a group of loyal friends who all support him without question.
You're beginning to see kind of distortion of reality as far as Hitler's concerned, because he's just surrounding himself with yes men.
And it's becoming difficult for anyone to actually talk to him, much less to criticize his plans.
He gets up late, he's quite erratic.
He's very much internalized within himself, comparing himself to great leaders like Napoleon and Bismarck.
Clearly, he's turning into an absolute megalomaniac. He doesn't want to be deviating from his destiny, from Providence.
Intent on fulfilling that destiny, Hitler is carefully plotting how to pull off his Polish invasion.
Hitler is aware that he does need allies. He's increasingly and repeatedly railed against Britain and France and even the US, so it's important that he also has allies, at least within Europe.
So Hitler now turns to the one European country that's always stood by him, Italy, and its leader Mussolini. Two weeks later, Hitler's in the grand reception hall of the new Reich Chancellery. He's here for the signing of a military alliance between Germany and Italy. With typical understatement, it's known as the Pact of Steel.
The Pact of Steel now is a moment where they agree to fight side by side in the event of war.
This is a great piece of diplomacy on Hitler's part. He secured a key military alliance in Europe. Now, he can step up his planning for war. Early the following morning, Hitler calls his military leaders to his office in the new Reich Chancellery for a secret meeting. he's got important news for them.
Hitler's putting his cards on the table, and he tells them pretty bluntly that there's going to be a war in the east.
That he will attack Poland at the most favorable opportunity, that this will start a war, and it may be a war that could last for a long time. It could last, he says, up to 10 years.
Hitler also tells his generals that war with Britain and France is inevitable at some point, but that he wants to avoid a war with the West until German rearmament is complete, a process that he sees as finishing in 1943.
Hitler's briefing that day signals a major escalation. It's clear his plans for war are expanding well beyond Poland's borders.
I think you can see from this point onwards that Hitler believes a world war is inevitable.
Hitler's lit the blue touch paper, and it's unclear whether anyone can put it out. As his preparations for war continue behind closed doors, Hitler pretends to the watching world that nothing out of the ordinary is going on. On the 7th of June, he embarks on a series of very public travels around Germany.
Hitler visits the Volkswagen plant at Fallersleben.
He loves cars, and he's been involved in the design of the Volkswagen Beetle.
From here, Hitler goes to Vienna, where he watches Richard Strauss's opera, A Day of Peace, which is quite ironic given the current situation.
And he goes back to his hometown and visits his father's home and his old school.
Then Hitler travels to Munich, where he looks at an exhibition of German art, which he celebrates as being pure and also in keeping with Nazi ideology.
It's Adolf Hitler, the domestic leader of the Third Reich, that's very much on show here, not Adolf Hitler, the warmonger who's about to plunge the world into the second global conflict that century.
To the public, it's business as usual. But in private, Hitler's preparations for war are accelerating.
Hitler returns to the Berghof and announces to his generals that the invasion of Poland will begin on the 26th of August, which is just a fortnight's time.
Hitler's in a confident mood, and that's because of something quite unexpected. Throughout the summer, his ministers have been secretly negotiating a deal with the unlikeliest of allies. Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union.
This is a particularly surprising development given how large the Soviet Union looms as an enemy in the Nazi worldview.
Hitler's primary ideological enemy throughout his life has been Bolshevism. They are, as far as he is concerned, the Antichrist.
He believes the Marxists, the communists, are the great enemy. He's conflated them with the Jews. And really, there is going to be a reckoning in his mind between the USSR and Germany at some stage. So why would he do a deal with them at this stage?
In fact, it had been Stalin who'd reached out first.
Stalin, he is naturally paranoid, and his paranoia at this time has convinced him that the British and the French are really trying to manufacture a war between Germany and the Soviet Union.
Stalin's terribly worried that the Soviet Union is simply not ready to face an onslaught from the Nazis. So he's very keen to have a deal with Hitler which buys him time.
But Hitler can see how an alliance with Russia could oil the wheels of his Polish invasion.
He's either got to invade Poland and risk that Britain and France will come in a war against him, or he can isolate Poland, and perhaps the best way of isolating Poland would be to have some kind of agreement with the Soviet Union.
Hitler thinks that with the might of Russia on Germany's side, Britain and France wouldn't dare to intervene, leaving Poland unprotected. A week later, and Hitler's planned invasion of Poland is just 6 days away. But he still doesn't have a deal with Stalin. A deal which he believes will stop the British and French from coming to Poland's aid. So he makes an unusual move.
Hitler sends him a personal telegram, and in that personal telegram, he outlines all the reasons why this deal is going to be good not only for Germany, but also for the USSR. The question is, what's going to happen next?
Hitler waits. But minutes turn into hours, and there's no reply.
Tensions are running very high at the Berghof.
28 hours go by, and still no news. At dinner, Hitler's more agitated than usual. Then, finally, a servant brings a note.
Word reaches him that Stalin is willing to sign a pact. And at that moment, he bangs the table with his fist and says, "We have got them." It is a moment of absolute euphoria for Hitler.
Hitler's triumphant. He thinks his deal with Stalin will neutralize the British and the French, leaving him free to invade Poland unopposed. But he's about to be disappointed. News of Hitler's pact with Stalin quickly spreads.
Well, the rest of the world is absolutely horrified by this. And of course, what it does is it ratchets up the tensions and makes everyone realize that war is probably no longer going to be avoidable.
But Hitler's seriously misjudged things. Despite his deal with Russia, the British are still determined to stop him. And on the 23rd of August, the British ambassador to Germany, Neville Henderson, travels to the Berghof to talk to Hitler.
Neville Henderson is very much the classic British diplomat of the time, a stereotypical English gentleman, typical of his class and his generation.
Neville Henderson delivers this message from Chamberlain, which is that if you go into Poland, we will honour our obligations to Poland. There'll be no Czechoslovakia this time around, chum. It will mean war.
Hitler is not expecting this. He believes that Britain is going to continue with its policy of appeasement.
Hitler is absolutely furious. He turns on his temper and explodes, claiming that it is Britain that is trying to annihilate Germany, a completely preposterous claim.
He says that he is prepared, if necessary, for war, but he would prefer war now than in 5 or 10 years' time.
Hitler is so angry that Henderson can't reason with him, and he walks out. But once Henderson's left, Hitler's mood immediately changes.
Hitler slaps his thigh and says, "I've done it." He believes that the British cabinet will fall the next day, that Chamberlain, confronted with his determination to press on with Poland, will cause the British to back down. He's completely wrong.
Chamberlain doesn't back down and in fact reiterates that Britain is going to defend Poland. And so Hitler starts to question his belief that Britain would never intervene in this conflict.
Maybe, just maybe, he's wrong. With just 2 days to go before his planned invasion, Hitler returns to Berlin. But his arrival goes uncelebrated.
Hitler notices that the cheering crowds are nowhere to be seen. It's quite clear to Hitler that the German people don't want another war.
Even more doubts whirl through Hitler's mind. It's Friday, the 25th of August. Hitler still plans to invade Poland at dawn the next day. But in a last-ditch attempt to get the British on side, he invites Neville Henderson to the new Reich Chancellery. He's in a very different mood to their last meeting.
Hitler's realised maybe he did overstep the mark at the Berghof, and he tries to really put his cards on the table. Look, here is how we can solve this.
He tells Henderson that he has no quarrel with Britain or the British Empire. In fact, he would like to guarantee the British Empire that if it was ever in trouble, German troops would fight alongside British troops, maintaining India for Britain.
But all of this, of course, is predicated on the fact that they will solve the Polish question to Hitler's satisfaction.
This is a fairly crude attempt to separate the British not only from the Poles, but also from the French.
Hitler sends Henderson back to London and even puts a plane at his disposal to make sure that he gets back to London as quickly as possible.
But Hitler's offer isn't worth the paper it's written on.
As soon as Henderson leaves the Chancellery, Hitler signs the order declaring that the attack against Poland is to begin at dawn the following morning.
Despite his assurances to Henderson, Hitler's set on war. But then, his plans start to unravel.
At 5:30 p.m, the French ambassador arrives and tells Hitler that the French will definitely fight if Poland is attacked.
Then news arrives from Britain. The British have signed a formal military alliance with Poland.
Hitler's absolutely staggered. He'd been convinced that the British had been bluffing.
Then news comes from Mussolini, who Hitler had expected would back him in any military conflict.
Mussolini has decided that he doesn't have the resources to go to war, and that if there's a war growing out of the dispute with Poland, that Italy will remain neutral.
Hitler's stunned. In 1 hour, he has lost one ally on whom he was relying and gained the two adversaries who he had been convinced and importantly told everyone else would stand aside.
Hitler's invasion of Poland now looks riskier than ever. Is he willing to gamble everything and take that risk?
When Hitler learns that Britain and France have done an alliance with the Poles and that Mussolini will not be coming in on the war on his side, he calls a halt to the invasion of Poland, which is at that moment only 9 hours away.
The atmosphere in the Reich Chancellery is febrile. Everything has been thrown into chaos by Hitler's decision.
Hermann Göring asked Hitler, is that the case? Has it been cancelled?
And Hitler goes, no, 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 we're still going into Poland. This is just a stopgap to see if we can forestall the British.
Earlier in the day, Hitler had offered to support the British Empire, so long as they allow him to invade Poland. He's still convinced they'll agree. Now, he has to wait for their response. While he waits, Hitler puts Germany on war footing.
The Nazi government announced to the people that war is imminent and to prepare for war. So anti-aircraft guns are installed onto rooftops, transport is limited, and Germany begins rationing.
The mood of the German people at this point is rather resigned to war, but there's certainly very little enthusiasm. Indeed, many of them are miserable at the prospect of a new war.
On the streets of London, the British people are just as resigned. But there's one difference.
They're seeing that Hitler has to be stopped, so whilst they don't like the idea of going to war either, they understand that it's necessary.
This is a war that neither the British nor the Germans relish in the slightest. Two days later, and there's still no word from Britain. The tension is getting to Hitler.
He looks exhausted and at times appears to be cracking up. He starts ranting about how if the British do stand by Poland, he will destroy them. He says, if the British intervene, I will build U-boats, U-boats, U-boats. I will build aircraft, 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 everything in short, staccato sentences. If they deny us butter, I will be the first to stop eating butter, butter, butter. It seems that he's completely lost the plot. But he recovers it. He issues orders that the invasion will begin on the 1st of September, and he is not in the habit of changing his mind twice.
Then, at 5 p.m. that day, Neville Henderson finally returns to Berlin with news from London. Hitler receives him at the Chancellery at 10:30 p.m.
Henderson returns to Berlin and finds Hitler again in a polite and affable mood.
Henderson says to him, we've been talking to the Poles, and the Poles have actually agreed to negotiate directly with you, but you are going to need to do those negotiations.
Really, Britain is kind of like pushing Hitler into a corner now. You know, how is he going to get out of this?
And Hitler immediately sees this as a trap, because he realizes if he doesn't at least attempt to begin these negotiations, he's going to be seen as a warmonger, not only by the Allies, but also by his own people.
So Hitler plays for time. He says he'll think about Britain's offer and respond the next day. Then, later that night, Hitler confers with his closest advisors.
It's interesting that not all of Hitler's entourage are great warmongers at this point. And it's Hermann Göring who actually says to Hitler, you know, maybe we don't need to push this, maybe we don't need to invade, maybe we don't need to go for broke.
But Hitler replies, I have gone for broke all my life. This has been his greatest strength. He has been a gambler who has gambled again and again and again, and he has won and he has won and he has won. And he cannot conceive that his luck will run out, and he cannot conceive of a different way of operating.
The next evening, Henderson returns again to the Chancellery. This time, Hitler's in a very different mood.
Hitler has once again swung back into his most aggressive mood. He says that the Polish question has to be solved immediately. He will submit to these provocations no longer.
He is prepared to enter into negotiations, he tells Henderson, but only if they send a Polish negotiator within 24 hours, and he knows perfectly well this is impossible, and so does Henderson.
Henderson says to Hitler, this sounds like an ultimatum, but Hitler demands that Henderson relay this information back to the British government.
This is all part of Hitler's grand plan. He's deliberately acted as though he's willing to enter negotiations with Poland. But at the same time, he's ensured that they'll never happen, allowing him to claim that the Poles have rejected his offer of a peaceful settlement. The very next day, the British decline Hitler's suggestion of a Polish negotiator arriving within 24 hours.
Hitler meets his generals and tells them that the invasion will definitely begin on the 1st of September.
With less than a day before invasion, there seems to be no going back for Hitler.
He's going to go into Poland, he's going to take back the Danzig corridor, he's going to wipe Poland from the face of the earth. Nothing is going to stop him. He's going to roll the dice because this is his destiny. This is Germany's destiny, and he's the leader of the German people.
4:45 a.m. on the 1st of September 1939, Hitler finally launches his invasion of Poland.
In the early hours of the 1st of September, the battleship Schleswig-Holstein opens fire on Danzig.
And not long after that, the invasion proper begins when 1.5 million German soldiers, tanks, and planes pour across the border in what they hope is going to be a lightning war that will defeat the Poles very quickly.
Even as his troops mow down Polish soldiers, Hitler still believes that the British and French won't intervene. But behind closed doors, they're feverishly deciding what to do next. Two days after Germany invades Poland, Neville Henderson makes one last fateful visit to the new Reich Chancellery. He presents Hitler with a British ultimatum.
It says that if Germany does not withdraw her troops from Poland within hours, then Britain will honor her obligations towards Poland and declare war on Germany.
When Hitler finally realized his calculation that the British ultimately won't go to war against him is proven to be false, he's utterly shocked. He sits there almost in stunned silence and then turns to the rest of his advisors with a furious look on his face and says, "What now?"
2 hours after Henderson's delivery of the British ultimatum, at 11 a.m. on the 3rd of September 1939, Britain declares war on Germany. France follows soon after. This is the war that Hitler has craved for years. The inevitable consequence of his desire for a greater German Reich. But it's a war he's starting on the back foot.
He's allied with his ideological main enemy, the Soviet Union.
And he's at war with the Western powers who he always thought would never go to war with him.
He's also quite concerned about the capacity of Germany's own military to meet the challenges he's set for them.
So, for an awful lot of people in Germany, and including generals and senior military commanders, this is the road to Armageddon, not the 1,000-year Reich.
Unwilling and unable to stop himself, Hitler has thrown the dice once more. His actions over the last 18 months, from the moment he invaded Austria, his lying, his bullying, his aggression, have all led to this moment. Adolf Hitler has plunged the world into war. On the 12th of March 1938, the strangest invasion in history begins. German tanks roll across the border into Austria. They're welcomed by smiling civilians who greet the German Führer, Adolf Hitler, as a hero. This is the moment when the countdown to the Second World War begins. The decisions and actions Hitler takes over the next 18 months will drag the world to war. Without him, there would be no Second World War. No Holocaust, no senseless killing of millions of people. To understand how it happened, we need to understand him. In this series, we're telling the story of these 18 months, from the 12th of March 1938 to the 3rd of September 1939, through the eyes of Hitler himself. Revealing how this bully, gambler, and arch manipulator brought the world to the edge of destruction.
It's a brutally cold morning, and you might imagine this would discourage people from coming onto the streets, but it doesn't.
The streets are just lined with thousands upon thousands of people celebrating. They're throwing flowers. They're rapturous in excitement that Hitler and his troops are here.
It's more like a victory parade than an invasion. Hitler is more like a movie star than a politician.
The crowds are so thick, it takes 4 hours for Hitler's driver to complete the 74-mile journey to Linz, the town where he grew up. Hitler is Austrian by birth. This is a true homecoming.
Hitler receives a fantastic welcome in Linz. The church bells are ringing and he's standing in his car, waving and smiling and giving the Hitler salute.
This is one of the moments in Hitler's career where he really shows emotion.
He normally kind of internalizes everything and keeps an iron face at all times, but at this moment, the tears are running down his cheeks. So happy is he to see the response from the people of Linz.
On the balcony of the town hall, he tells the assembled crowd that Providence has chosen him to unite Austria and Germany.
He believes that this is his dream fulfilled, this is his desire, and he feels that this is everything that he's worked towards throughout his career.
For Hitler, this is the realization of a long-standing ambition. He's been planning this ever since he came to power in January 1933.
Hitler has expansionist ideas. He wants to build a new fatherland. He wants to build a new Germany.
One of Hitler's key aims has always been the creation of a greater German Reich, an ethnically pure empire that would eventually extend across Central and Eastern Europe.
Hitler doesn't just want Austria. Czechoslovakia, Poland, and even the Soviet Union are all in his sights.
Austria is the obvious place for Hitler to begin. Germans and Austrians are linked by language, by culture, some would argue by ethnicity.
There's been this long-standing desire to unite Austria and Germany, which is why they're so welcoming.
The next day, Hitler attends to some personal business.
He visits his parents' grave and takes the advantage of a useful photograph opportunity.
He never forgoes an opportunity for a good photo, and this one, going back to his homeland, his place of his birth, the grave of his parents, this is obviously a wonderful photo opportunity, and Hitler is not going to miss out on that.
While he's in Linz, he signs the reunification of Germany and Austria.
Now, this is a myth. Germany and Austria have never been united before, but Hitler claims that this is a reunion. He is restoring the racial union, the national union of the German-speaking peoples.
And this is a classic example of Hitler manipulating history to serve his present agenda.
Austria is now a province of Germany, ruled by Hitler. Business complete. It's back to the victory tour. Next stop is the Austrian capital, where the reception is even more euphoric.
When he actually gets into the main square, the so-called Heroes' Square, ironically speaking, there are 200,000 Austrians. And when Hitler goes out onto the balcony of the Hotel Imperial, he's met by this incredibly enthusiastic crowd that keeps cheering and keeps forcing him to come out and acknowledge their cheers.
Hitler is thrilled and delighted, but his triumph tastes that much sweeter because when he was last in Vienna, he was a nobody, ignored by his fellow countrymen.
Hitler's at his lowest ebb. He's been reduced to sleeping on park benches, begging.
Hitler is 20 years old. He's been in Vienna for 2 years.
He comes to the capital with the idea of pursuing an artistic career. He tries to enroll in the School of Fine Arts, but he's rejected.
Hitler has a self-inflated view of his own talents, but really he doesn't put in the hard graft to actually do the work to achieve his dreams.
He's rather lazy, and this is something we'll see later in his career as well.
So there's kind of almost a sense of not really seeing this through to the end and not much sort of sense of purpose.
He admits that during his time in Vienna, this was the lowest period of my life. And it really was, you know, imagine him lonely, isolated, he's got no friends, he feels embittered.
This life on the streets certainly isn't the life of acclaim Hitler's dreamt of. He sees himself as a big man, a hero. And today, in March 1938, Hitler's youthful fantasies have finally become a glorious reality.
This is the greatest day of his entire life. Here he is, back in Vienna, where he's been at his lowest point. He's turned his life around. He's now the Führer of the Greater German Reich.
And when he stands on the balcony at the Imperial Hotel, it's a watershed moment for Hitler because he suddenly starts to really believe in his own genius. Might have been slightly in check beforehand, but it's certainly not now. It's completely unleashed.
Hitler now thinks he's unstoppable. Austria is just the beginning, and he's already plotting his next move. While Hitler stands on the balcony of the Hotel Imperial, soaking up the adulation of the Austrian people, elsewhere in Vienna, violence is spreading through the streets.
Pretty much as Hitler arrives in Vienna, there's an outbreak of anti-Semitic violence.
Jewish shops are targeted, cars are wrecked, and Jewish people are beaten in the streets and also forced to scrub the streets on their hands and knees.
Anti-Semitism has a very long history in Austria, but Hitler's arrival legitimizes violence on the streets and the humiliation of the Jews as well.
Hitler is known as an anti-Semite, and anti-Semitism is a big part of Nazi ideology.
Hitler has long blamed the Jewish population for Germany's ills. He believes that the German Empire should be pure and untainted by the Jewish population.
The violence on the streets of Vienna is a savage reminder of the darkness that lies at the heart of Hitler's beliefs. On the morning of the 16th of March, Hitler flies back to Berlin. He's greeted by more cheering crowds.
Everybody in Berlin seems to be out in the streets to yell delight as Hitler returns to the capital.
This is an extraordinary outpouring of love that most politicians can only dream of.
Hitler's very popular with the German people because he's seen as having restored Germany to its former greatness, not only domestically but internationally too.
You have to continually remind yourself of the truly pitiful state that Germany found herself in, firstly after the First World War, and secondly after the effects of the Great Depression.
When Hitler comes to power in 1933, Germany's in economic despair. And he promises to make Germany great again, and he does that.
Hitler has delivered an economic miracle. He's basically returned Germany to almost full employment. He's got the economic system going again. He's built the Autobahn. He's managed to fund lots of public initiatives and rearm Germany.
But he's also given the Germans back their self-respect on a world stage. And this bloodless coup, by attaching Austria to Germany, is really a wonderful moment for the Germans and a chance for them to be proud about themselves again.
Suddenly Hitler looks like the shining star, the perfect embodiment, even God-given embodiment of the new Germany.
By 1938, Hitler mania absolutely has taken hold of Germany. You know, people are just sort of thinking, my God, you know, he's the new Messiah.
I think in terms of politics, you've got to say that Hitler is the first political rock star.
You have Hitler cakes, you have Hitler roses, you have cafes, shops, restaurants being named after Hitler.
They are even spending a lot of money and time to go in droves to Berchtesgaden, which was his holiday retreat in the Bavarian Alps, in the hope of just catching a little glimpse of Hitler.
It's hardly surprising that on this cold March day in Berlin, Hitler feels all-powerful. In his mind, he can now do anything he wants. Three days later, Hitler is in the splendor of his HQ, the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. He's poring over maps of Europe with his right-hand man and propaganda chief, Joseph Goebbels.
One of the great ironies about the leading Nazis is that none of them look like the Aryan stereotype.
Hitler looks nothing like the Aryan ideal that he talks about, the blonde, blue-eyed, strong, muscular, ideal specimen of the Aryan male.
He's relatively short, about 5'9". He has brown hair. He's not exactly muscular, he's in fact quite doughy featured.
Joseph Goebbels is similarly un-Aryan.
Goebbels is a rather sort of small figure. He's got a club foot, and any kind of deformity is very much frowned upon in Nazi ideology.
But what he has in abundance is an extraordinary talent for PR and spin. I mean, he is the original spin doctor.
Now Hitler's got something important he wants to discuss with Goebbels.
Hitler explains to him that the next item on the agenda is the Sudetenland.
The Sudetenland is the western, southwestern and northwestern fringe of Czechoslovakia, which comprises approximately 3.25 million ethnic Germans.
The Sudeten Germans feel oppressed by the Czechs, and they desperately desire to be unified with Germany.
Hitler's all too happy to oblige. But he tells Goebbels he's eyeing up more than just the Sudetenland.
In private, Hitler has much more far-reaching aims and ambitions, and in fact what he really wants is the whole of Czechoslovakia and nothing less.
He thinks that Czechoslovakia is a great gateway to the east. It also contains rich minerals and armaments that Hitler feels will benefit the Greater German Reich.
Hitler doesn't set a date for an attack, but he's determined to take Czechoslovakia this year. And if he has to use force to get it, That's what he'll do. Hitler's not afraid of war. War has made him the man he is. Hitler is marching with his regiment through a forest in the Belgian countryside. He's about to experience his first time in combat as a soldier in the First World War.
Hitler's regiment is tasked with capturing a series of farms held by the British.
The German army charge on the farmhouses, and Hitler sees his comrades fall around him, being gunned and being shelled.
He himself manages to get through this into a trench. He's fighting hand to hand with the British.
A bullet rips through Hitler's sleeve, but he remains undeterred.
This experience, while it's shocking, at the same time it's incredibly exhilarating. And most importantly, he survives it.
This moment changes Adolf Hitler's life. His wartime experience transforms his character and beliefs.
It fuels his nationalism and patriotism. It gives him a sense of fulfillment. But at the same time, he becomes indifferent to human suffering.
But there's also a sense, an absolute conviction in him that war is the solution to most countries' and races' problems. A belief that the strongest and the fittest will survive, and the weakest don't deserve to survive.
For Hitler, war becomes a glorious ideal and something to aspire to. So, 20 years later, Hitler's more than ready to launch another war to get his hands on Czechoslovakia. He moves on to the next stage in his plan. In Berlin, he's holding a critical meeting with a leader of the Sudeten German Party of Czechoslovakia.
Konrad Henlein is a rather unprepossessing figure. He's a bespectacled former schoolteacher, but he's very ruthless in his advocacy for the Sudeten German cause, and he's utterly committed to Nazism.
What Hitler wants Henlein to do is to request the Czech government to give the Sudeten Germans full independence, in the hope that the Czech government will actually refuse, and that then he would have an opportunity to have his war and really to take over the whole of Czechoslovakia.
Hitler's using Henlein because he's keen not to look like the aggressor.
Hitler, on the public stage, says that he's a man of peace. He doesn't want any future war.
Hitler knows he has to play a careful game.
Hitler doesn't want to provoke Britain and France, certainly not until he's ready.
He knows he can take on the Czechs in battle, but not the military power of the British and the French too.
Hitler can be reasonably sure, however, by this point that Britain and France won't intervene.
He knows Britain and France don't want a war, so it's in their interests not to respond militarily to Germany's increasingly aggressive position.
So he's treading a careful line of giving the public image that he wants to, yet in reality, he wants this war and he wants Germany to expand more and more and more.
Hitler is kind of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and what we're getting between 1933 and 38 is Dr. Jekyll. It's the nice Hitler, it's the accommodating Hitler, but what we get from then onwards, we get the real Hitler, we get Mr. Hyde.
And Hitler's Mr. Hyde is about to be unleashed. Friday, the 20th of May, 1938, is a beautiful day. And Hitler is at the Berghof at Berchtesgaden. This is his picturesque holiday home, perched high in the Bavarian mountains. But a telegram arrives that shatters the peace.
News arrives that the Czechs are mobilizing as they've been spooked by reports that Germany is preparing to invade.
Hitler is completely taken by surprise.
Yes, he is planning an invasion, but later in the year. He's not planning it now, and in fact, those reports of German troop movements were false.
But the British and French don't know this, and they're not happy with Hitler.
Britain and France send a message to Hitler saying that if there is any German aggression towards Czechoslovakia, that they will get involved.
And the result of all of this is that Hitler begins to row back a little bit by assuring both the British and the French that there will not be an invasion.
The Czechs are obviously ready to fight if their land is invaded, but at the present time it seems as if wise counsel will prevail and this pleasant country be spared the horror of war.
The situation is calmed. But in the following days, Hitler's infuriated by international press reports, suggesting he's backed down under pressure from the Western powers.
Hitler is absolutely furious that he's been made to look weak, that Germany has been made to look weak.
It's incredibly humiliating for him, and this is not a feeling that Hitler likes at all, and you could trace this, of course, all the way back to his lower middle-class roots.
Adolf Hitler is not part of the German upper class, nor is he part of the German officer class. He never reached a commissioned rank. He was a non-commissioned corporal, and everybody knew that he was a non-commissioned corporal.
Hitler is very insecure, in particular in his relations with other international leaders who tend to be from a better educated, more middle-class background than Hitler.
The humiliation makes Hitler even more determined to invade Czechoslovakia and take the Sudetenland and beyond. He'll show them who's in charge.
On the 28th of May, Hitler assembles his generals and tells them that it is now his unalterable will to smash the Czech nation by force of arms, and that they must prepare military plans.
But some of his generals are not happy.
Ludwig Beck is the chief of the German general staff. He's a man of integrity, an old-style general, you might say.
What he doesn't want to do is get embroiled in a big war that Germany can't win. And he feels that Britain and France might well come in on the Czechoslovakian side, and it'll end to a Second World War, which Germany will ultimately lose.
One of the things that Beck does to try and dissuade Hitler is by appealing to his immediate superior, Walter von Brauchitsch, who was the commander-in-chief of the German army.
Beck tries to persuade von Brauchitsch to dissuade Hitler from taking a step which he believes would be calamitous to Germany, and he equally tries to persuade the other German generals to resign with him.
After 2 months of Beck briefing against him, Hitler's had enough and summons Beck's boss, Brauchitsch, to the Berghof.
Brauchitsch is a very different man. He's nowhere near as strong morally as Beck. He's very much under the shade of Hitler. He's slightly intimidated by Hitler, and he is not willing to stand up to him.
Hitler is furious. He's furious about what Beck suggested and stirring things up against his plan. And he tells Brauchitsch to get rid of him.
So violent is this confrontation that there are some people on the patio outside listening to it, and they're so embarrassed they go indoors.
What you see here is something of a typical tactic for Hitler to lose his rag in public situations and use that sense of social embarrassment and humiliation to maneuver people.
Today, the bullying works once again. Beck resigns. The army is now firmly under Hitler's control and is on war footing. Problem dealt with, Hitler settles down to some relaxation at the Berghof. He's a creature of habit, and today is very much like every other.
Hitler wakes late at the Berghof.
He even refuses to allow his guests to have baths in the morning because the very noisy water pipes run past his bedroom and he doesn't want to be woken up.
He has a rather sweet tooth, so the breakfast will be milk and biscuits and perhaps some chocolate.
Before attending meetings in the Great Hall between 11 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
At lunchtime, him and his guests sit around the dinner table. You can tell who's in Hitler's favour because he has his favourites sitting opposite him, to his left and to his right.
Hitler's a vegetarian, so he'll just have a plate of vegetables for lunch.
During the course of lunch, he often tends to bore his guests with diatribes on how brilliant a vegetarian diet is.
More meetings follow in the afternoon, followed by a trip to the tea house,
where he has hot chocolate and apple cake, and then he's driven back to the Berghof whilst the others have to walk.
Dinner will be at 8:30, followed by a film night.
Now, Hitler's a real movie buff. He absolutely loves classics such as King Kong, but also he loves Disney cartoons as well.
Goebbels has made a gift to him of several Mickey Mouse films, which he seems to enjoy.
After they've watched a movie, Hitler and his guests sit by the fireplace where Hitler talks about his favourite subject, himself.
He basically gives a lecture to whoever his unfortunate guests are for hours at a time, and most of them are very relieved when they can finally go to bed.
But this period of relaxation doesn't last. 2 days later, on the 2nd of September, Hitler's joined at the Berghof by the leader of the Sudeten Germans, Konrad Henlein.
Throughout that summer, Hitler has been pulling Henlein's strings, instructing him to make increasingly impossible demands of the Czechoslovak government.
But shortly after Henlein arrives, news comes which confounds Hitler and delights Henlein.
This is the surprising news that the Czech government will give self-rule to the Sudeten Germans as long as they remain part of the Czechoslovak state.
Henlein is amazed, flabbergasted. He's absolutely surprised to have got what he's asked for. And he says, they've given us everything.
Henlein thinks they've won. But this isn't what Hitler wants.
Hitler's not interested in compromise or negotiations. He doesn't even just want the Sudetenland. He wants the whole of Czechoslovakia.
Hitler tells Henlein to reject the Czechs' offer and exclaims, "Long live war, even if it lasts 2 to 8 years."
The very next day, Hitler summons his generals to the Berghof.
Hitler tells his generals to set the 1st of October as the date of the invasion.
But Hitler knows he still needs to spin events so that it looks like he has no choice but to invade, that he's been provoked by the Czech government's intolerable behavior. In just a week's time, he has the perfect opportunity. Hitler's on his way to Nuremberg for the most important date in the Nazi calendar.
The Nuremberg rallies are an annual celebration of the Nazi Party, attended by Nazi Party members, government officials, the military, and usually this takes the form of a large parade.
The Nuremberg rallies are a demonstration of power not only to the German people, but also to the world, that this is a new Germany, a Germany that is strong, a Germany that will not be defeated. It is pure megalomaniac theatre.
Hitler understands the power of political theatre. He knows that his public image is all important. He's been perfecting it right from the start. Hitler is reluctantly on his way to the Munich studio of a local photographer. For the first time in his political career, he's going to allow himself to be photographed.
Hitler decides to be photographed by Heinrich Hoffmann, so just by one photographer who he knows, who he trusts, and indeed who he can control.
It's the beginning of a successful relationship that will mold Hitler's public persona.
Hoffmann tries to dress him in various clothes. He tries him in a lederhosen. And that doesn't really work out, so they settle on Hitler's suits, which create a very powerful image.
And they also look at the gesticulations and the various forms of mannerism that Hitler's got.
And they try and weed out those that are too overblown or too ridiculous.
What we end up with is a stiff posture, his arms folded, his brows knitted, his lips pressed thin, and that signature neatly trimmed moustache.
"15 years later, Hitler has perfected his image as the savior of Germany. A man of the people who's also a visionary genius. This year's Nuremberg rally gives Hitler the perfect showcase.
1938 seems the biggest Nuremberg rally yet. 6 days of celebrations, parades, jubilation in the street, and everybody's looking forward to Hitler's speech.
Hitler's public speaking technique has been honed over many years, so it's really fine-tuned by 1938. He starts, first of all, by saying nothing.
He'll begin quietly, almost getting the audience to lean into what he's saying.
Meine deutsche Jugend, nach einem Jahr kann ich euch hier wieder begrüßen.
Then builds in rhythm and pitch, becoming increasingly passionate and agitated.
Wir wollen ein Reich sehen.
Until he's flailing his arms around and shouting.
Und in euren jungen Gehirn brennt derselbe Geist, der unten herrscht.
Sweat's pouring off him. You know, he's almost in a messianic trance. He's got to this crescendo where he delivers his final point.
Und hinter uns kommt Deutschland.
And then he kind of slumps. And it's not just an act, actually. He's physically and mentally exhausted.
And this has a fantastic effect on audiences. They swoon, some people even faint, and they cry with passion.
In his final speech of the rally, Hitler addresses the Sudeten problem.
He works himself into an absolute fury about what are essentially imagined atrocities being committed by the Czechs against the German minority in Czechoslovakia. He claims that they are trying to wipe them out, annihilate them. He hurls insults at the Czechoslovak president and tells the German people that he will have the Sudetenland by the 1st of October.
Hitler's a past master at stirring people up. And with these words, he deliberately throws a grenade into the heart of the Sudetenland.
The next day, the German-speaking people in the Sudetenland rise up, attacking police stations, rioting on the streets, asking for their savior to rescue them from persecution.
The Czechoslovak government responds by imposing martial law in the region, and 10 Sudeten Germans are actually killed.
Events are unfolding exactly as Hitler has planned. He claims the Czechs are terrorizing the German minority. Now, he has the excuse he's been looking for. Europe is now on high alert as Hitler stirs up the crisis in Czechoslovakia. In a bid to defuse the situation, the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, makes an unusual request. He sends word to Hitler, asking if he can come and visit him in person for the first time.
Neville Chamberlain is the quintessential English gentleman, very refined, always with his umbrella, very immaculately dressed, very cautious, careful of his words.
Neville Chamberlain is desperate to avoid war at any price. World War I was meant to be the war that ended all wars, and the trauma and impact of the First World War is still in the minds of the British government and people.
This is not an age when leaders jump on and off aeroplanes to confer with each other, and if he is to avert what seems like an inexorable drift towards war, what is required is something totally out of the ordinary. And taking his first flight across Europe to intercede with Hitler is that sort of dramatic gesture.
My policy has always been to try to ensure peace, and the Führer's ready acceptance of my suggestion encourages me to hope that my visit to him will not be without result.
Chamberlain flies to Munich and travels by train to Berchtesgaden.
The whole journey to Berchtesgaden, they're on a parallel track, are trains full of guns and tanks and military rolling stock, reminding Chamberlain that Nazi Germany is now a really powerful military nation.
Chamberlain meets with Hitler at the Berghof shortly after 5 p.m. It's pouring with rain, and the sky's dark. A storm is brewing, and Hitler's behavior matches the weather.
The meeting between Hitler and Neville Chamberlain is almost Monty Python-esque. We have Hitler arrayed in a military uniform with his medals, perspiring with vexation. Neville Chamberlain attempting to be cool with a kind of British reserve.
Hitler's in a very bullish mood. He begins by completely exaggerating the number of Sudeten fatalities, saying 300 have been killed. And as a result of this, Germany is determined to do something about it. It's not going to stand idly by. He's effectively threatening invasion.
And Chamberlain is flabbergasted. He looks at Hitler, and Chamberlain was not afraid of anyone. He says, "Why have you brought me here? If that was what you wanted," he said, "a settlement of this matter by force, you should never have brought me here. You've brought me here under false pretenses."
And Hitler begins to calm down and says to Chamberlain that he only actually wants Sudetenland territory.
Hitler says, out of great respect to you, if you are prepared to persuade the Czechoslovaks that the Sudeten Germans should be allowed to be independent or join with the Reich if they wish, then I am prepared to go along the route of peace.
And Chamberlain's response is, well, I'll take it to the Allies and my government and see what comes of it. And so that's the end of the first meeting at the Berghof.
No sooner has Chamberlain left the room than Hitler claps his hands together in delight. It was all an act.
Hitler's a very good actor and indeed a very good manipulator. He's able to change his mood at whim to give the kind of impression that he wants to.
He can become a bully if he needs to become a bully. He can not be a bully when he wants to be. He's more of a kind of sociopath, really. He knows exactly what he's doing.
Hitler believes he's played a blinder. He tells the assembled company that he has backed this dried-up civilian into a corner.
He thinks that if the British are willing to allow the Sudetenland to cede from the rest of Czechoslovakia, then obviously the Czech government are going to refuse that, and that gives him his excuse to invade. So he thinks he's got it all sewn up.
But Chamberlain doesn't fall into Hitler's trap. Instead, he pulls the rug out from under him. "6 days after the meeting, Hitler's back in Berlin. He hears news he hasn't been expecting.
The British and French governments rather call Hitler's bluff at this point by convincing the Czechoslovak government to cede the Sudetenland to Hitler.
Of course, this is not what Hitler wants. Hitler doesn't want just the Sudetenland. What he wants is the whole of Czechoslovakia.
So, Hitler presents Chamberlain with even more demands. The Czechs must leave the Sudetenland immediately. German troops will go in on the 1st of October. War with Britain and France now seems closer than ever. With just 5 days to go to the planned invasion, Hitler gives a speech at the Berlin Sportpalast in front of a crowd of 20,000.
Hat jetzt in seiner Hand, entweder dieses Angebot jetzt akzeptieren und den Deutschen endlich die Freiheit geben, oder wir werden diese Freiheit uns jetzt holen.
He rants and raves. He's described as shrieking like a banshee. He says that if the British and French don't agree, then they can have war. People describe him as almost losing control.
This is an unusual instance of where his true self is shown. He's very good at hiding his true self, what he really wants. The mask slips briefly, but it slips enough for those who are watching to realize the true essence of Hitler.
Around noon the next day, Chamberlain's advisor, Horace Wilson, visits Hitler in the Reich Chancellery.
Horace Wilson brings a message to Hitler that the Czechs have rejected his terms, that they will hand over the Sudetenland, but he must renounce the use of violence.
Hitler refuses, and Wilson counteracts that by saying that if Hitler does not stand down, that Britain and France will come to the aid of Czechoslovakia.
This news stops Hitler in his tracks.
Hitler's really surprised by this because he just doesn't believe that Britain and France would do that. He thinks that Britain and France won't risk a general war.
But nevertheless, this warning does unnerve him to a certain extent. I think it's possible to see that this is a moment where doubts begin to enter his mind.
Hitler has a choice: back down or invade, and risk dragging Britain and France into a devastating war with Germany. The world holds its breath as Hitler decides whether to throw the dice or not. Next time, Hitler's confidence grows as he plots the next stage of his master plan.
For the first time, he's actually talking in terms of war and the Jews in the same breath.
And edges the world closer to disaster. On the 12th of March 1938, the strangest invasion in history begins. German tanks roll across the border into Austria. They're welcomed by smiling civilians who greet the German Führer, Adolf Hitler, as a hero. This is the moment when the countdown to the Second World War begins. The decisions and actions Hitler takes over the next 18 months will drag the world to war. Without him, there would be no Second World War. No Holocaust, no senseless killing of millions of people. To understand how it happened, we need to understand him. In this series, we're telling the story of these 18 months, from the 12th of March 1938 to the 3rd of September 1939, through the eyes of Hitler himself, revealing how this bully, gambler, and arch manipulator brought the world to the edge of destruction. This time, we've reached the 27th of September 1938. Hitler has successfully taken control of Austria and is now threatening to invade Czechoslovakia. Britain and France are warning that they'll step in if he goes ahead with the Czech invasion. The future of Europe hangs in the balance. It's late afternoon on Tuesday the 27th of September. Hitler is meeting with his closest advisors in the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. He's agitated. For months, he's been planning the next step in his grand plan, the invasion of Czechoslovakia. But he's worried that if he invades, Britain and France may declare war on Germany. And that is not his only problem.
When Hitler's in Berlin, he's looking out of the window of the Reichschancellery at some of the German troops who are heading towards the Czech border.
He notes to his dismay that they're not met with the kind of enthusiasm he'd been hoping to see from German people.
And what he's quite struck by is the sight of civilians not cheering, not applauding, but really avoiding the sight of these German troops.
It makes Hitler think that perhaps he's misjudged the mood of the German people.
It's the first sign, possibly, that he has to tread a little bit warily, and this does have an effect on him.
Hitler's so shaken, he does something surprising. He writes to the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, and appears to offer an olive branch.
Chamberlain responds by organising a conference between Germany, Britain, France, and Italy, and it's to be held in Munich.
Chamberlain, from his perspective, thinks, I told you, this guy is reasonable. We can talk to him, so we'll do, and we strike a deal, and all will be fine.
Chamberlain asks the fascist dictator of Italy and Hitler's ally, Benito Mussolini, to act as a mediator.
Mussolini takes quite an important role in this because he influences Hitler at this point. So he says to Hitler, it would be a good idea. It's a good idea. You better turn up.
Hitler agrees to the conference. Just 2 days later, Hitler meets Mussolini, Chamberlain, and the French Prime Minister Edouard Daladier at the Führerbau, his headquarters in Munich. The future of peace in Europe lies in their hands.
You have two very polar opposite couples at the Munich conference. You have the two fascist leaders, Mussolini and Hitler, decked in their uniforms, decorated with medals, very bombastic, very flash.
And on the other side, you have Neville Chamberlain and the leader of France, Daladier, who are much more sedate, civilian, bourgeois, well-dressed, and well-meaning and polite, which is a spectacle that would be quite funny if it wasn't such a serious occasion.
It's very clear from Hitler's demeanour during the discussions that he's not particularly happy to be there. He's rather uncomfortable socially, not least because German is the only language he can speak, so he sticks quite close to Mussolini.
He allows Mussolini to do the translating for him and very much plays a back seat during this whole negotiation.
And you see Hitler starting to ape Mussolini a bit. It's very, very strange. And it just underlines that Hitler is not as experienced at this kind of thing as he likes to think he is.
Secretly, Hitler wants the whole of Czechoslovakia. But late that night, after hours of negotiation, he seems to accept a compromise. The British and French agree to transfer one Czech region, the Sudetenland, home to 3 million ethnic Germans, over to German control.
They finally do the deal at 2 o'clock in the morning, everyone signs, and you finally have the Munich Agreement.
It's decided that the German occupation of the Sudetenland will begin in 2 days' time, on the 1st of October, 1938. But Hitler isn't happy. Later that day, Chamberlain makes a personal visit to Hitler at his apartment in Munich.
Chamberlain is very happy. He's jubilant. He feels that this is a new era of peace between Germany and Britain. Hitler's very different. He's a lot quieter. He seems silent and annoyed.
Chamberlain produces this piece of paper, and that piece of paper represents a commitment by Germany and Britain never to go to war with one another again, and they both sign it.
Hitler attaches no significance whatsoever to this piece of paper. It is an entirely throwaway, cynical move.
Here you see the contrast. Chamberlain believes in the diplomacy of pieces of paper. Hitler believes in the diplomacy of armed force. He knows that this piece of paper means nothing.
The Prime Minister comes home. Home to an empire filled with joy and relief. Home to a welcome that he will never forget.
Back in London, Chamberlain is greeted with a hero's welcome. He holds up his signed piece of paper and declares, "It is peace for our time."
And we are determined to continue our efforts to remove possible sources of difference and thus to contribute to assure the peace of Europe.
But that's not what Hitler is thinking. Three days later, Hitler enters the Sudetenland. His new subjects are jubilant. Back in Germany, he's celebrated as a saviour of peace. The Munich Agreement is a triumph.
Of course, on the surface, it's a great success for Hitler.
This is something that gave him a lot of credibility and a lot of support in Germany.
And yet, on a personal level for Hitler, he feels that he's failed. He wants the whole of Czechoslovakia, and he's not satisfied with just this region. He doesn't like having to make compromises, and he feels very uncomfortable having to make concessions.
The Munich Agreement is Hitler's idea of hell. Diplomacy is for people who want to take things slowly. Hitler didn't want to take things slowly. He wanted to march into Prague.
And he's really furious that he's been cheated out of this, not just by the British and the French, but also by the German people. He considers that they've been weak in this hour of testing.
The ink is barely dry on the Munich Agreement, and Hitler's already planning his revenge. Less than 3 weeks later, Hitler meets his army commanders at the Reich Chancellery and issues them with a top-secret new order. They're to prepare for the invasion of Czechoslovakia.
Hitler tells them he's still going to wipe Czechoslovakia from the face of the earth, and that nothing has changed. It might take him a little bit longer, but he's still going to go and invade Czechoslovakia.
This is a man who is behaving like a spoilt, erratic child.
And like a child, Hitler's not prepared to compromise. He's determined to get what he wants, whatever the cost. Hitler's in Munich at an annual Nazi dinner at the grand ballroom of the City Hall. For tonight, he's putting his anger over Czechoslovakia to the back of his mind, and he's determined to enjoy the occasion.
There's an atmosphere of celebration, the great and good of the Nazi movement together in the home, the capital, as they call it, of the Nazi movement.
They're all having a fine time drinking away. You know, it's really cause for celebration.
Hitler takes his seat next to Goebbels, his chief of propaganda.
This reflects the close relationship that the two men have.
But the celebrations are about to be disturbed.
Somebody comes over and informs Hitler that a telegram has arrived from Paris. Hitler reads it and then storms off in a huff without giving his speech, without giving any explanation.
Guests look on in surprise. What they don't know is that this is all a big act.
In fact, Hitler had heard the news from Paris earlier in the afternoon.
A German diplomat, Ernst von Rath, has been murdered at the Paris embassy by a 17-year-old Jewish teenager called Herschel Grinspan.
Hitler might be preoccupied by thoughts of Czechoslovakia, but his hatred of the Jews is never far from his mind.
Hitler sees this murder as an opportunity to strike against the Jews.
But Hitler's got a problem. He's been carefully cultivating an image as a man of peace. He can't risk being seen to instigate violence.
This is quite characteristic of how Hitler has tended to operate throughout the lifetime of the Nazi movement. He's always very keen to maintain plausible denial, if you like.
Hitler can sit back, and if it goes well, he can sort of take some credit for it, but if it goes badly, he can distance himself from it and say, oh, I had nothing to do with these outrages.
After Hitler storms out, it's up to Goebbels to deliver the evening speech.
Goebbels is one of the most powerful figures in the Third Reich. He's a frustrated journalist, and he just so happens to have this absolute genius for PR. He really is the world's first malevolent spin doctor.
Goebbels stands up and he starts on this outraged speech about this murder that has occurred in Paris.
He says that any demonstrations of German public outrage that may happen over the next few hours and days should not be stopped.
The audience are left in no doubt. Goebbels has just suggested Nazi Party members across Germany should retaliate the murder of von Rath.
Phone calls are then made from this room in Munich to the Nazi organizations across the country.
Spread around Nazi stormtroopers who then organize a widespread series of attacks on the night of the 9th of November against Germany's Jewish community.
Kristallnacht, or Night of the Broken Glass, is the start of the Holocaust.
It is a night of pure violence and terror.
Synagogues are burned down across the country. Thousands of Jewish-owned shops and indeed homes have their windows smashed in. The shops are often looted.
Even the Hitler Youth get involved with this, with older boys leading younger boys in the streets and stating that the streets must run red with Jewish blood.
91 Jewish people are killed during the night of the 9th of November.
And if all that wasn't enough, 30,000 Jews are then incarcerated in concentration camps.
Hitler avoids being seen to give the instruction for the anti-Semitic violence to begin. But those who take to the streets that night have no doubt they're carrying out the Führer's wishes. They're acting on a set of ideas that Hitler's been promoting for years.
In 1919, Hitler is still in the German army after the defeat in World War I.
He's been recruited to give talks, to give speeches.
Essentially anti-Marxist lectures to soldiers before they're demobilized.
And he discovers that he has a real charisma and knack for giving speeches.
He's rather good at influencing people.
One day he's giving one of his lectures about Marxism and suddenly changes tack to talk about the Jews.
Hitler feels that there is a sort of international Jewry plot to dominate the world and stop honest, true Germans from fulfilling their destiny.
This is the first known anti-Semitic statement from Hitler. His denunciation is so strong that one of his handlers takes him to one side and tells him to tone it down. Even for sympathetic listeners, this is extreme stuff. Hitler's been soaking up the far-right politics of Munich.
There's a wide network of far-right nationalists in Munich at the time, and Hitler latches on to many of their ideas. He comes to see Germany's defeat in the First World War as the result of Jews and socialists stabbing Germany in the back.
He buys into this myth that the German armed forces had never been defeated in the battlefield, but the defeat had instead come on the home front thanks to Jewish subversives fomenting revolution at home.
Hitler comes to see the Jews as the scapegoat for all Germany's problems and believes they must be forced out of the country. His speech in 1919 might be the first time he publicly speaks out against the Jews, but it's not the last. Anti-Semitism shapes Hitler's ideas right through to that terrible night in November 1938. The morning after Kristallnacht, Hitler knows he needs to distance himself from the violence. His deputies claim the attacks were simply the result of ordinary Germans angry at the Jews. But very few people believe this.
German people, by and large, are not very positive about the events of Kristallnacht. This is not necessarily because they care about the Jews, but because they disapprove of the widespread destruction of property and looting that takes place. They see that as unbefitting of a civilized nation like Germany.
Although not all Germans are anti-Semitic, many feel now that the Jews do not have a place within German society.
Outside Germany, much of the world reacts in shock and outrage. Kristallnacht exposes the violent anti-Semitism that lies at the heart of Hitler's Nazi regime.
It's clear to the outside world that this government is determined to end Jewish life in Germany.
The world now is beginning to see the true nature of the Nazi regime. Hitler's mask is beginning to slip.
Hitler's been revealed as a racist thug, and his mask is about to slip even further. It's Thursday the 10th of November, 1938, and Hitler's in Berlin. He's about to give an extraordinary and top-secret address to selected members of the German press.
Hitler admits to them that although he's been playing the role of peacemaker for many years, that's not that accurate. He's not really a man of peace at all.
He says, now I am going to reveal a different side of my personality, and I want you, the press, to emphasize that I have become uncompromising. I am now the uncompromising Hitler.
Now is the time to start to recalibrate the German people in readiness for war.
He says, I want you, to the German press, to push that idea forward to the German people that you're not going to get an omelette without breaking eggs. You've got to get this through armed force.
German people have to learn that the realities of power politics will sometimes demand force of arms, that at some point there is going to be a great trial of strength. This is preparing the German people for the war which he has been planning for a long time.
As he encourages the press to prepare Germany for war, Hitler continues to plot the next stage of his plan. He's determined to get his hands on Czechoslovakia's natural riches.
Czechoslovakia is rich with natural resources, as well as the world's largest single armaments factories, the vast Skoda works.
But Czechoslovakia represents something even bigger for Hitler.
It's about more expansion. It's about making the German Reich greater. It's about achieving living space, Lebensraum for the Germans.
He believes that Germans, as the Aryan race, as the strongest people in the world, deserve to have more room to live in. And that room, that space that he has in mind, lies in Eastern Europe.
He needs resources for the German people. He needs land for the German people.
And Hitler gets his inspiration from the unlikeliest of places.
Hitler grew up reading the famous German novelist Karl May, whose adventure stories were based in the American West.
Hitler sees Lebensraum in Eastern Europe as very much a similar project to the American conquest of the Western territories of the United States.
He viewed the United States of America, certainly white America, as an extension of that Anglo-Saxon or German hierarchy.
He's seen the fact that they've moved from the coast all the way into the interior. They've subjugated or effectively wiped out the Native Americans, taken their land, and prospered as a result of it.
If America looked to the west for expansion, Hitler's looking in the opposite direction. Czechoslovakia is firmly in his sights, but he's also eyeing up much of Central and Eastern Europe, and ultimately the vast expanse of the Soviet Union.
In the east of the Soviet Union, even in Czechoslovakia, in Poland, up in the Baltic states, there's a lot more of these natural resources, and he wants to get his hands on them.
There's no doubt that he's utterly ruthless in the way he's planning to deal with the peoples who are in this land that he's going to be taking over. Some will be deported to Siberia, some will be exterminated, and some will be enslaved. And in their place, he will populate those lands with good ethnic Germans.
At the end of 1938, Hitler knows he has to be very careful about how he achieves these ambitions.
He is concerned quite how far he can push that idea of the nation wanting to expand without getting into serious amount of trouble. So how will that be responded to by the Western powers?
But he cannot believe that Britain and France will go to war. Why should they care? That's his logic, because that's what he wants to hear.
Hitler's still careful to keep up the pretense of being a man of peace on the world stage. On the 30th of January 1939, he gives his annual address to the members of the German parliament, the Reichstag, at the Kroll Opera House.
He says that Germany has got no future plans for territorial conquest. This is an obvious lie because he's planning it at the time.
Then Hitler goes on to say something extraordinary, that if there is a war, it won't be him who causes it.
It'll be caused by the Jews and Jews agitating for war, and that any violence to come can squarely be laid at their door.
Wenn es dem internationalen Finanzjudentum in und außerhalb Europas gelingen sollte, die Völker noch einmal in einen Weltkrieg zu stürzen, dann wird das Ergebnis nicht die Bolschewisierung der Erde und damit der Sieg des Judentums sein, sondern die Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse in Europa.
This speech marks a crucial shift in Hitler's public declarations.
For the first time, he's actually really vocally talking in terms of war and the Jews in the same breath.
In this speech, Hitler pins the blame for any future war on the Jews and ominously predicts it will lead to their annihilation in Europe. "11 days later, Hitler returns to the Kroll Opera House. This time he's meeting secretly with his army commanders. He's got something important to tell them. He lays out his plans for conquest of Czechoslovakia and beyond.
He gives notice to his most senior military commanders that a war is going to come, and it will not be an ordinary war, that this is a war of different ideologies and different races.
He's absolutely determined here. He won't shrink back from his view or from his ambitions.
Hitler is set on a war of expansion in the east, and the rest of Czechoslovakia will be his next act. But he wants to protect his image as a man of peace, so he needs to find an excuse to start the invasion. A month later, something happens that plays straight into Hitler's hands.
At this point, there's a great deal of disunity in the Czechoslovak state. So there's an increasing divide opening up between the Czechs and the Slovaks. The Slovak leader is Father Joseph Tiso. He's a Catholic priest, and he's very much in favor of Slovak independence.
Joseph Tiso demands of the Czechoslovak government Slovakia's independence.
Dr. Emil Hacha is the Czech president, and he decides to react with force to dismiss these attempts of autonomy. He puts Tiso in prison. He really wants to play the tough guy. But Hacha is making a mistake here.
This plays into Hitler's hands because he's able to present the Czechoslovak state as essentially ungovernable, as breaking down in the face of the national aspirations of its people.
I mean, this is just exactly what Hitler wants. He wants to stir it all up, have them all at loggerheads with one another, and then he can just go boom, straight through the middle.
At noon the next day, Hitler's in his newly completed HQ, the new Reich Chancellery.
The new Reichschancellery is absolutely magnificent. It's enormous. And it just says power, control, authority, all in one massive edifice.
This was supposed to be at the very heart of what would be the new Germany, the new German Reich. It was a place Europe would be ruled from.
Hitler's here for a crucial meeting with Goebbels, Joachim von Ribbentrop, and Wilhelm Keitel.
Von Ribbentrop is foreign minister. He's an ex-businessman. He's slavishly loyal to Hitler, and for that reason, a lot of the other top Nazis despise him. They see him as a bit of a snake.
Wilhelm Keitel is the chief of the armed forces, and he's Hitler's ultimate yes man. He's completely devoted to Hitler.
Hitler reveals to von Ribbentrop and to Keitel that he is going to use this political crisis in the Czechoslovak state to act, and he's going to act very fast.
He tells them to set the date of the 15th of March, so just 5 days away, for the invasion.
Goebbels talks about Hitler crowing with delight at this, and the reason he's crowing is because finally he can get his military invasion.
Hitler loves the risk and thrill of a gamble and is about to play his hand once again. But first, he wants to make sure the odds are loaded in his favor. He needs to secure his excuse for invasion. Three days later, the newly released Slovak leader, Josef Tiso, visits Hitler in Berlin. Hitler intends to use Tiso as his match to ignite the tinderbox that is Czechoslovakia.
Tiso and Hitler, they're different characters, but they share some common ground in their political beliefs. Tiso, his main goal, achieving Slovakian independence, is worth collaborating with Hitler.
What he's trying to do with Tiso is to tell him, you need to press now your claims for the independence of Slovakia, and I'll back you up.
He's basically offering a carrot to Tiso and say, you know, I can help you achieve your goals, and you help me achieve my goals.
Tiso follows Hitler's instructions, and the next day, Slovak independence is declared.
Hitler has manipulated the situation in Czechoslovakia to his advantage. And he's about to make the most of it. Hitler's in the new Reich Chancellery. His troops are poised to cross into Czechoslovakia. All they need is his order. But before Hitler can start his invasion, he has an unexpected visitor. In a final attempt to save his country, the Czech president, Dr. Emil Hacha, travels to Berlin to plead with Hitler to call off the invasion.
He's 66 years of age, he's got a heart condition, and he makes a blunder, really, that plays into Hitler's hands.
Which is to go to Hitler, to meet the wolf in the wolf's lair.
Hacha is in a difficult situation, but also personally a frail, older man.
Hitler, he knows exactly what to do once Hacha is there.
Hitler has a talent for sensing other people's weaknesses and exploiting them. This is a skill he's been fine-tuning over a lifetime. Ten-year-old Adolf Hitler hates his father.
Hitler's father, Alois, was quite violent, really. He would beat them up, Adolf and his brother, if they stepped out of line.
What Hitler learns from this, from his father, is it's all right to be a bully, and actually you can get your way by bullying too.
Hitler doesn't seem to treat his sister terribly well.
In her diary written when she was younger, Paula talks about Hitler being very much a bully.
At the same time, Hitler is smothered with love and affection by his mother, Clara Hitler.
She is very nurturing, very kind. She smothers Hitler with love and affection, and Hitler becomes very spoilt because of this.
Hitler continues these kinds of personality traits into adulthood. He becomes used to being able to throw tantrums to get his way and to bullying people who are weaker than him.
That young bully is now the most feared man in Europe. In the early hours of the 14th of March, Czech President Hacha is about to endure a masterclass in intimidation. Hitler makes Hacha wait for hours in the Adlon Hotel, while he and his entourage enjoy a film at the new Reich Chancellery, a new romantic comedy, fittingly called A Hopeless Case. Only once the credits have rolled, at 1:15 a.m., is Hacha finally summoned by Hitler.
This is all part of Hitler's strategy to wear Hacha down and to exploit his tiredness and weakness.
Hacha comes in thinking he's just going to have a nice, pleasant negotiation with Hitler. And the room is lit by lamplight, so it's in that nice gangster tradition of subdued light, which gangsters enjoy, intimidating people in subdued light, and Hitler was an expert at this.
By this point, Hitler's got Hacha exactly where he wants him. He's in Berlin. It's kind of, he hasn't quite got the kind of spotlight straight on his face and bound his arms behind a chair, but it's kind of not far from it.
Hacha comes in, he said, I've always wanted to meet you. I've always admired you and the way you've made Germany a great country. And so Hitler lets him finish this little fawning speech, gets to the end of it. Hitler looks him in the eyes, and then he says, Czechoslovakia has let me down. He said, you have let me down. He said, your people have let me down.
Hitler basically puts a pistol on his chest and says, look, these are our demands, and if you don't comply with them, we basically start attacking you.
Hitler tells Hacha that the Germans will invade at 6 a.m. that same morning, and he must tell his forces to stand down.
Hitler then gives the floor to Hermann Göring.
Hermann Göring is Hitler's number 2, effectively. He is second most powerful person in Nazi Germany. He's the head of the Luftwaffe.
Göring raises the ante by saying to him, Hacha, sign this, or we'll bomb Prague tomorrow morning.
And it's too much for Hacha at one stage. He collapses.
Göring looks around and, oh God, he's fell on the floor.
What happens if he dies now? The whole world is going to think that we murdered the Czechoslovak president in the Reich Chancellery.
And he goes into the corridor and he shouts, get Dr. Morell. Because Dr. Morell is Hitler's famous doctor. Dr. Morell then gives him an injection, possibly amphetamines. It's stopped him having the heart attack.
By 4 a.m., Hacha has recovered just enough to hold a pen. He signs Czechoslovakia over to Hitler.
Hitler's reaction is jubilant. He orders his 2 secretaries to give him a kiss on the cheek, and he says, this is the greatest day of my life. I will go down in history as the greatest ever German.
He's happy to bully, to manipulate other politicians to get what he wants.
Let's be under no illusions about this. This is straightforward gangster tactics. This is blackmail on an extraordinary scale with real brutal militarism behind it.
Just 2 hours after Hacha signs over Czechoslovakia, German troops cross the border. They travel through the Czech countryside in freezing weather. Facing no resistance, they're in the capital Prague within 3 hours.
As the German troops arrive in Prague, the reception is very different from a year earlier in Austria.
There are no cheering people anymore. There are just sullen faces.
This is a country that has been absolutely beaten and has been taken over against its will.
At around noon, Hitler follows his troops into Czechoslovakia on his heavily armoured train. He then travels the last 60 miles into Prague in his open-topped Mercedes limousine. That night, he sleeps in Prague's Hradčany Castle, the ancient residence of the kings of Bohemia.
That's like spending the night in the White House or kicking out the Queen and moving into Buckingham Palace. It's very symbolic, and he spends the night there, and it is saying, I am now your master, I am now your king. Bow to me.
Hitler's triumphant. He's got exactly what he wants without having to fire a shot.
It's still a calculated gamble by Hitler, but he's pulled it off again because the response of the British and French is to literally do nothing.
Once again, as Hitler has predicted, the Western powers have stood aside.
This invasion of Czechoslovakia is a brutal wake-up call for the West.
Here before our eyes unfolds the drama of a nation dying. At Munich, the Führer gave his word that he wanted no more land in Europe. These pictures show you what his word is worth.
The reaction in Britain and France is one of absolute horror.
He's ripped up the Munich Agreement and showed his true colours.
Hitler cannot be trusted. He's lied and lied and lied. We were duped last time around. We will never be duped again.
Kristallnacht exposes Hitler as a racist bully, while the invasion of Czechoslovakia shows him to be a warmonger.
He is now included within the German Reich, 7 million people, many of whom have no connections ethnically, culturally, linguistically with Germany. So the world can see that the gloves are off.
This is military conquest of foreign lands. Hitler has torn up the diplomatic rulebook he was only ever pretending to play by. Two days after Hitler takes Czechoslovakia, the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, gives a speech in his home city of Birmingham.
Neville Chamberlain abandons his policy of appeasement.
He says that Britain will no longer tolerate Hitler's attempts at expansion.
But Hitler believes Chamberlain's words to be nothing more than an empty threat.
Hitler remains convinced that the talk that's coming from Britain and France in this period won't be matched with action. They won't actually challenge him.
Hitler's stared down Britain and France and won his game of brinkmanship. All his high-risk maneuvers have paid off, and he has no intention of stopping. Next time, the world holds its breath as Hitler makes his riskiest move yet.
Nothing is going to stop him. He's going to roll the dice because this is his destiny.
And inches the world closer to war.